Hello. All right, I am back. Sorry, that last video probably ended a little abruptly. I ran out of recording time before I had realized it. But I'm going to jump back into um, the story of Oedipus and some of the relevant plot points that I think will be helpful for you as you um, try to crack this story and figuring out what's going on. It really is a convoluted soap opera. So as I was saying before I was cut off in the previous video, um, once Oedipus accomplishes this great feat, which is solving the riddle of the Sphinx, he is proclaimed the new king of Thebes, and that gives him the right to take the widowed queen as his bride. And of course, he doesn't realize that this is his mother because he thinks that his actual mother is the woman that he ran away from in order to avoid the prophecy coming true. He thinks the woman who raised him is his biological mother. So Jocasta, the queen, he doesn't have a clue, and he takes her as his wife. And of course, Jocasta, the queen, doesn't realize that this is the baby that she and her husband Laios had taken into the wilderness to be killed. They just assume that baby did die. She has no idea that this is her son returned. So it's just a whole string of unfortunate incidents that happened in this play. But all of these incidents are converging to form what ultimately will be the tragedy of Oedipus. All right, so the tragic flaw, what is it? We've talked about it a little bit, but it's that inherent flaw in the tragic hero's character, which kind of precipitates his own undoing. And this is going to be important to remember. Her tragedy is a direct result of that internal flaw. This flaw must in some way impede their ability to make correct or moral choices. Most tragedies operate on this simple guiding principle. Sometimes bad things happen to good people, and sometimes good people do bad things. So it's not a question of right or wrong or who's morally superior. It just comes down to, sometimes good people do bad things, and sometimes bad things do happen to good people, and there's not always a rhyme or reason for it. Um, Classic tragedy, and I do stress the word classic because as we get away from the period of the ancient Greeks, we're going to see playwrights start to, I want to say, they somewhat get away from that stringent classical formula. Okay, um, not all tragedies are going to necessarily follow this principle, but for classic tragedy, it's always going to result either in the death of the hero or at the very least the dismantling of his or her power. And again, what is the ultimate goal of tragedy? It is to restore balance. All right, so this sacrifice of the hero is an important element of that. The hero must be sacrificed in order for that restoration of balance to occur. Usually, in most tragedies, that does mean the death of the main protagonist. It means the death of the tragic hero. But, in some cases, just like with Oedipus, it doesn't end with his physical death, but it ends with his banishment. The crown is stripped from him. He is punished. He is sent into exile. He can no longer rule Thebes. and he can no longer see his family. You know, he's lost his wife. She's committed suicide, his wife slash mother. Um, he's taken away from his children. He's lost his kingdom. He is as good as dead. All right, everything that mattered to him has been taken from him. But that's part of that reversal of fortune, so that the corruption, which has come about because of his actions, whether intentional or not, that's a necessary part of the component. I call this the tragedy of Oedipus, which is the fact that by simply living his life, Oedipus fulfills an ancient curse. Nothing he can do by his own choice can actually um, stop the prophecy from being fulfilled. He certainly tries, he certainly gives it his best effort. But the play does beg these questions about the idea of free will and agency versus fate. And this is something we've seen before. We saw it with the Aeneid, for example. Um, to pinpoint a question that I think could be a valid question to arise out of this, what makes Oedipus a tragic hero if he's simply a victim of fate? Because again, we said that in order to be a tragic hero, he has to be destroyed by his tragic flaw, which means his destruction has to come from within. It's a two-edged sword, because on the one hand, we do see the role that fate is playing in this. But in trying to outrun that fate, we also see Oedipus making bad choice after bad choice after bad choice. A lot of it comes from his hubris, his pride, his downright arrogance, his short-sightedness. And sight is a very important metaphor in this play. We'll definitely be talking about that. In fact, one of the main characters is a blind prophet named Tiresias. And I have a slide about Tiresias that we'll get to shortly. But again, you know, Oedipus acts out of rage a lot of times. He doesn't always think things through as clearly as he should. The reason he ends up killing his father and fulfilling the prophecy is because he gets so enraged because of a road accident that instead of talking it out, he just whips out his sword and like stabs the guy who just happened to be his real father. He didn't have a clue. Um, and time again, you know, we see throughout the play, Oedipus is, I mean, he's not a bad person. He's not a bad king, even. He seems like he genuinely cares about the people of Thebes. He tries to be a fair ruler. He tries to do all the right things, but he has these impulses that he can't seem to control. And that really sows a lot of the seeds of the events that happen. I always like to throw this one up there. He did what? Yeah, uh, as bad as it sounds. Yeah, this is a true soap opera. You know, they mentioned that in the video that I posted for y'all. that the closest thing that we have in modern entertainment to tragedy is soap opera. All right, and this is a little bit more about the role of fate in this play. You know, our lives are, according to the tragedies, ruled by the gods and superior forces beyond our control. Um, in most cases, not only does the hero precipitate his own downfall, but he is also powerless to change that course. So, in some ways, even if he could control that flaw, you know, the course that he has already been set upon usually is something that's already been determined. But what we're seeing is the fact that his internal flaw is directly playing into that. Oh, let me back up here just a second. I want to talk about this concept here, and I'm probably going to try to wrap this up soon so I don't have to record another video. But this is a concept that we'll talk about: unity of time, place, and action. And this was a theory proposed by Aristotle, which said that all tragedies, and by default, he really meant all stories in general, should take place within a 24-hour period. He didn't believe that it took any longer than that to tell a story, that all action could be confined within a single day. So it's this idea that within a single 24-hour period, we're going to get the introduction to the story, we're going to get the crisis, we're going to get the catharsis, and we're going to get the resolution, all within the course of a single day. And this is why most early tragedies are divided into 3 acts, because those 3 acts represented those 3 prime times of day as they correlate to the action. So we would get morning, the problem is introduced; noon, which is when sort of, you might say, the conflict reaches its peak; and catharsis and resolution, which would be night. And Oedipus, even though, again, some plays will eventually deviate from this, as Shakespeare's plays do, but Oedipus certainly follows this formula. And then, last but not least, I want to touch on why sight is such an important metaphor for this play. We have the character of the blind prophet, Tiresias. And Tiresias is, at first he's welcomed into Oedipus's court because Oedipus is trying to get the answer to why Thebes is under a curse. And he thinks that Tiresias will have the answers. But when Tiresias states that the reason for the corruption, the reason for the curse, is Oedipus himself, he gets very angry and he casts Tiresias out. He doesn't want to hear it. And Tiresias tells him, you may have the gift of sight, but you are very blind. And the idea is that Tiresias may be physically blind, but he's able to see further in his blindness. And then we have Oedipus during the catharsis of the play. He, at that point, does literally blind himself so that he can see further. So once he becomes blinded, he actually is able to see the truth of his life, whereas before he was blinded. I'm going to leave it here. This will wrap